Hey, welcome to Star Service Live. I'm Alexis, and this is my show. And I'm not actually live today. I apologize for that. I would like to be in a place where I can give more lead time and post on social media before I'm going to go and record an episode, but Venus moved into Sag, and I jumped up this morning and I was like, I got to record a show. So you just kind of have to go with it. So I'm going to start as I normally do with an invocation, calling in and building a container, and a brief exercise. So feel free to join me in this, or just observe, or go walk away and do something else. Opt out as you feel, called to do so. So if you will join us, I invite you to close your eyes if that's available to you, and just start by taking a few breaths into your body and settle into your own physical space. And you might rock back and forth, side to side, whether you're standing or sitting or lying down, given your unique abilities in this moment, in your particular body in this season. And just notice how the weight is distributing itself, and see if you can connect to this idea of being supported, of feeling supported. And if there's a particular way in which you don't feel that support, what could you adjust physically so that in this moment you do feel a little more supported by the earth, by the planet? And maybe even beyond support, you actually start to feel into the affinity between your physical substance and the physical substance of the planet Earth. You might also feel that affinity between your atoms and cells as their own sort of body, and then the way in which the Earth has that kind of exponentially being so much bigger than we are, so much more massful. But gathering all of that, I invite you to open to stepping into this container. I call out to the helping spirits to be with us, to help us to form a container that can hold this call in a good way. I call out to the ancestors, to those who lived and died well, who met whatever were the challenges of their lives in their particular times, and were able to innovate and rise to the occasion of those challenges, to release the old ways of thinking that were necessary to be released at that time, so that the new ones that were wanting to be dreamed and born through them could come and be seeded into their environments, be proliferated throughout their ecosystems, their communities, their families as they understood them at that time, those lands where they lived. And we're able to bring that wisdom across the threshold from life into death and back to us as true ancestral helping spirits. You ancient, legendary, luminous ones, I ask you to be here with us now. Please help us to feel held by your wisdom and your medicine. Please help us to feel held in the challenges that we now face in our times at this moment on the planet, in these lands, in these bodies. And please help us to be sparked and inspired and leaning into the discomfort that is totally part of rising to the occasion that is each human life, and is human life in a time, in a season, on a planet like this one. Please be here now. Thank you. I call out to each of the helping spirits of all those that may join us at any time, non-locally, asynchronously on this recording. I ask you to be here in all the many forms and faces you take. Even if we don't know you, even if we're not able to give name to you or face to you, even if we're not even quite sure that you exist, please be here with us anyway, and help us to feel held in this container. Help us to feel supported. Help us to feel that affinity between human and spirit that is unique and often quite mysterious, and even sometimes very individual or even collective in ways that we don't always like or appreciate. But please be here with us, helping spirits. Help us to be inspired to our own divinity. Help us to be inspired to our own terrestrial earthiness, and help us to bring those qualities together in a way that brings what is unique about us and our unique relationships with spirits forward in a good way. I call out to the spirits of the land and the great spirits of the land where each of us reside, to the ancestral helping spirits of those places, and to the helping spirits of those places, and all the other beings and energies that would show up for us helpfully at this time. Please be here. Help our circle to be rooted in reality. Help this experience to be real, and to help us to be a little more real and a little more harmonious and peaceful co-creators and collaborators with these ecosystems in which we live, whether we're from there or not, whether we've taken 5 minutes or 15 to notice that we are a part of the land or not this morning, or even this year or this lifetime. Please be here and continue to do what you do so well, just showing up, just doing you, just being the land, so that we may be a part of the land and we may come to know ourselves as the land spirits that we are, as the earth spirits that is our true nature for our choice to take a body at this time. I call out to earth and air and fire and water, these oldest, most ancient ancestors and all your many faces and forms. And I ask you to swirl into our call and be with us and animate this work that we seek to do here together. This listening and experiencing and sharing, if that is something we feel called to do. And with all of these energies gathering around us in circle, I invite you to just breathe back into that sense of your body knowing itself and your body knowing the earth. And drop an anchor from your center and your perception of your center all the way down into the earth below. And trust that with the confidence of an anchor, your grounding can just clunk, thunk right down into the very center of the earth. No matter how many miles that is, no matter how wild of an imagination it takes to think of anchoring in the very center of the earth, that place of true yin, of essence, of darkness and stillness and silence and solitude that is healthy and necessary for life. That place of potential before things come into form. That place of the earth's dreaming. As your anchor rests there, I invite you to just feel into what that feels like, beyond just the feeling of being supported. Almost like someone's giving you a boost up. And let that energy rise into your body and resonate and flush out into your boundaries, flush out into your skin and your bones and your connective tissues and your organs, your blood, your nervous system. Just take a moment to really notice what it feels like, what it seems like, what it looks like, all the different qualities that the energy of the earth brings up into your body. And just take a few good solid breaths to really receive that. And from there, allow that energy to open like a flower, to receive the grace and the blessing and the divinity and the inspiration and the perspective and clarity that are always coming down to us from the sky, from the weather, from the atmosphere. Even beyond that, from the sun, the moon, the stars, the heavenly bodies, the cosmic mysteries, from our planetary teachers and zodiac teachers, and even beyond all of them, all the ways in which we receive and perceive of divinity, all the way up to the highest power of the cosmos, that sort of white hole event horizon where everything bursts into existence, which is just as primal, but in a balance that is non-hierarchical with the energy of the below, of the true yin at the center of this earth, and presumably every other inhabited planet. Allow those two energies to meet in you. Feel yourself bathed in that radiant light, and warmth, and heat, and sound, and expression, and expansion, and movement. That which seems so precious if it's winter where you are, and so abundant if it's summer where you are. Allow that energy to flow down, dripping like nice warm sap coming off of a tree, down into your head and your heart and your belly. Let it flow in and be received by the energy of the earth, the energy of humanity and substance and presence. Let it warm and lubricate your joints. Let it delight and inspire your senses. And really feel the love affair that is this two frequencies of energy, this polarity of yin and yang that flows through all of us at all times. Really foreground that into your awareness and let it flow through your body. And let that energy of the above flow back down into the anchoring system by which you connected to the energy of the below. And feel how this is your vertical axis. This is your pillar of sovereignty. This is your claiming of your space. Let that flow out and light up your boundaries, ignite your bones with that knowing that you are a being of free will, that you are here to make choices and you're always choosing and manifesting through your choosing, even and especially maybe when you don't know it. And that this act of being here was the primary choice by which you are now incarnate, the choice to bring your soul into form and have this experience and grow and learn and express and both do things that are totally unique to you and maybe make no freaking sense, and also do things that are very old and very ancient and very logical to ensure that everyone else who makes that choice to incarnate as a human has an even better time than you did of landing here and having the support they need to bring their medicine forward. Feel all of that duality swirling around, mixing and mingling, loving difference within. And as you come back into your own center, I invite you to anchor fully in your heart as the center of these two polarities. And from that heart-centered place, I invite you to signal to your body that we now step into a circle, that our circle becomes ever more grounded and divinely inspired by your willingness to participate in this activity, this practice. And that our circle itself has its own sort of pillar of sovereignty in the middle. Even if it's a temporary circle, even if you're just passively listening while you're driving to work or something, it's still there. You can still nod to it, bow briefly to it. And as you step in, I invite you to settle your body, trust back into physical presence where you are physically, and know that you can toggle between them, right? Physical presence and this energetic sense of sharing in the circle. May what needs to be said, and may what needs to be heard, be heard. And may these proceedings go forward in a way that is good and true and beautiful for all life and aligns with the dreaming of the earth. When you're ready, you can open your eyes, make the choice to be here now, maybe pat yourself down. And as you're listening, feel free to do whatever you need to do, right? Just, I should have said in the beginning, if you're going to do something kind of energetic, you might not want to be driving a car or operating heavy machinery. But, some people can really multitask. I don't know. Depends on your chart, your personality. So, hi, I haven't done this in a while. Thank you for being here. So the roadmap forward is that I'd like to check in personally about what's been coming up for me in my practice. I think that will flow organically into an astrology download and just sharing what's been coming up for me as I sit with the ephemeres and the transits and all of that stuff. Ephemereses, something like that. And then I just want to check in about my client and student facing practice and what I'm looking to explore with that in this season, how that's been going. And then we'll close the container, hopefully download a little bit of a blessing and maybe spark a little bit of an activity, another practice at the end to kind of help us navigate next steps, which is something that I think I've done before on this show. But if you're new to the show, my name is Alexis. I'm a practitioner based in Kansas City, where I grew up. I've lived a few other places. but this is home, and I study in a non-traditional shamanic community called the cycle community, learning to pick up spiritual practices, metaphysical practices that are all about humans of contemporary time, of any lineage or tradition or culture, et cetera, or background, learning to pick back up the responsibility of humans for co-creating with the earth, with help from wise and loving spiritual help, and actually doing it in a way that makes us kind of good scientists. That's not just kind of freeform or belief-based or dogmatic, but actually is very, very rigorous in noticing what rings true and what doesn't, taking experiments into action and expression, monitoring our wake and learning from the things that we do, learning from our mistakes so that we all go forward collectively in a better way than what humans are currently showing themselves capable of doing at this moment. So that's mostly where I'm rooting my stuff. I've taught yoga, I've done, a lot of different things. But that's kind of where all my practices are rooted now, are in the psychocosmology. And if you want to know more about that, there's some references on my website. Yeah. So what's happening right now for me, first, I want to open space for your personal check-ins. And because no one's here live, there's a few ways to do that. You can leave a comment on my Substack or on the YouTube. You can comment on a recent Instagram post that you find if you want to just go that route, if that's easier for you. You can send me an email, though I think that's a little less powerful, though I'm totally happy to receive the emails. But I think part of it is being willing to share inside of a group container, potentially. But if you just want to share with me, or if there's something that feels like it's really important to share with me, feel free to share it. I'm always appreciative of that. Yeah, or you can sit down and close your eyes and pause the recording and journal a little bit and just check in with what's going on for you in this season, what's coming up for you in this moment. What are you working on? What are you excited about? What are you challenged by? So yeah, take some space to do that. Feel free to explore that. For me, one of the big shifts is moving on to Substack. I'm really excited about it. Because it feels like a little more social facing, reader cultivating, connection cultivating platform than MailChimp, which seems more like me having a blowhorn, hello, here's my voice. I'm looking for responsivity and connection, right? I'm calling my little Substack Star Service Connect because I want it to feel like more community building, given that I practice in such a robust community. And then I teach in this sort of larger student community that my teacher has going online. I would really like to, or I'm training to teach in that community. I'd really like to be tending that energy of community with everything I'm doing. And that's a vision that I continually go back to when I haggle with myself over whether I'm teacher, healer, artist, this, that, the other thing. It all comes back to none of that really matters. Are you building community? And all of those things can be part of that, right? And there's ways you can do those things. I can do those things in ways that actually destroys community, because that's so easy to do right now, given the way that we are so wounded and so deficient around the energy of community. So part of what I'm tending is just the existence of community. And so I'm having a lot of conversations with folks right now, locally and abroad, just, dropping the C word, triggering the fuck out of people, getting triggered myself by the way that people are triggered by the concept of community, all of that good stuff. But that's a big inquiry for me, is how do I root what I'm learning about community in the cycle community, where we have this very specifically revealed vision of how to form a true community that can truly hold these particular teachings in a way that is viable, is healthy, is in alignment with the dreaming of the earth and all of that. I'm really inquiring of myself, how do I then root that back into how I'm showing up in my day-to-day life in Kansas City, in, KCK, right here on Pacific Avenue, all of that stuff. So that's a big shift for me, is shifting over there. I'm also just trying to really shift away from the algorithms, social media, anything owned by Meta and all of that crap, because they just screw us all over constantly. And I'm tired of that sort of serfdom of working to create all this content. I have got, 4,000 or 5,000 followers or something like that, which is, maybe not that much, but to me, it's a lot of people. And most of them are people I've cultivated relationships with over these 10 plus years that I've been really active on social media, starting kind of like on Twitter in 2009, when I was totally headless and, like on a lot of drugs and just being really ridiculous and at times very offensive and violent. But, still trying to share my truth, no matter how ignorant and, entitled I was at that time, at the age of 20 or whatever. And so I feel this sense of connection with that community of followers. And then I just feel like my voice is being silenced. Nowadays, Instagram shows you immediately, like you have all these analytical tools where it shows you how many accounts you reached. And it's like, well, why didn't I reach all my accounts? It's like, you guys are the ones in charge. What the hell? It's just really unfair. It's like this super commercial model, which, just sort of to me just goes completely counter to everything I'm trying to build. So I really appreciate Substack as a place where folks can sign up, engage with my work if they want, engage with it at a timeline that they want. They don't have to wait for the scrolling. There's some magic random chaos to scrolling. To the algorithms. They're psychotic, but you know what I mean? Like, there is some magic to them. I scroll, I laugh, I share memes, you know what I mean? For sure. But it's definitely doesn't feel like the most viable place for like work by me and by other people that I really value. So that's why I'm looking more towards these subscriber kind of style models. And the thing is, I'm going to keep all my stuff free or donation based for the most part. And so I don't perceive of myself as doing like a big paywall program unless it really seems super valuable and helpful and necessary for me. But at this moment, that just doesn't feel right. And so, I would love it if you go in and do the like $70 a year subscription to Substack or the $5 a month or whatever it is. Because then you support, me doing this work for other people that totally can't donate. And Venmo is better, is what I'm finding out, because it doesn't take any fees. So I get about 60 of those $70. But I don't want to go into that too much. But it's been interesting just moving over there. I like what's going on there. There's a lot of crazy stuff there too. There's a lot of like weird sort of like anti-trans parents groups, Substacks, and anti-vax and anti-this and anti-that. There's a lot of hootenanny, as there is anywhere else on the internet. But I do appreciate the platform itself and the tools that it's giving me. So yeah, that feels like a semi-permanent home for this. I'm also exploring the idea of Star Surface Connect also being either in parallel or actually just converting to this question that I keep coming to of what I'm calling Heartland Mysteries, which would be sort of like an educational, content, creative, art, journalism, blah, blah, blah platform that is that plunges into the mysteries, that are alive for me in the Midwest, alive for me as a citizen of the United States, alive for me as a queer, non-binary person living in the Midwest, but also, for folks that are other places, folks that are other countries, folks that are in other cities. I'm just really curious about the intersection between the idea of heartland, land itself, and these extreme and ugly forms of land engagement that start to look like nationalism, capitalism, extraction, exploitation, ecological genocide and stuff like that, and more, maybe you want to call them animist or shamanic or earth centering, earth honoring, holistic, sustainable, blah, blah, blah forms of land engagement, and the ways in which we're all kind of navigating that question of like, how do we survive? That's kind of what Heartland Mysteries is for me about. But I always joke with my partner who works in politics and activism and stuff like that if I ever ran, or maybe if he ever runs for local office, the phrase will be putting the heart back in the heartland. Because the heart in these energetic practices is the center. And it has this centering, and in many practices, I think, has this centering, unifying, balancing function, and also has this sort of infinite quality where you go into the heart and it's almost like it can transport you to the heart of anything. There's this archetypal quality to hearts, where I can be in the heart and I can then be in the heart of my mind. I can be in the heart and I can be in the heart of heaven. In some work that I've done, exploring some of my like ancestry that comes from like the British Isles and that area of working with the fairies, I've sort of started to discover this quality of fairy, which is just this lens, this different way of seeing and engaging with helping spirits and nature spirits, because there's these, mythopoetic descriptions of the fairy realm, or fairy as a country or something, where it's a smaller place that gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you go into it. So there's this sort of paradoxical infinity to the heart that I think actually echoes across a lot of different traditions. And so I just love heart work, and I struggle with it too. So that's why I scratch at it with my conceptual creative leanings and stuff like that. So yeah, other than that, I'm just trying to stay current with what's going on in my life. Teaching a little bit, working on the manuscript a little bit, working for, this is kind of the segue into the astrology, working for money because I have to, and stuff like that. One other thing I wanted to talk about personally, I have this class that I've been stewing on, but what made me think of it is the crucifix that I have hanging there. And it's actually a crucifix with a rosary wrapped around it and a witch's ladder that a friend of mine in my community, who's an air person like I am, that's kind of, we look for our elemental homes. And I mean, in that community tradition, but it doesn't always correlate, but for me it correlates because I'm a double Aquarius. So it's kind of an air shrine over there, but there's a little bit of a strategy to it but it's also just aesthetic, because that's the wall that the crucifix looked good on for me in my studio here. There's a lot going on in the studio if you want to, just peek at it, but a lot of decorum, but it faces out. I live in a super Catholic neighborhood. There's actually a monastery and a convent on my block. So there's monks that like sing and nuns and process and do all these cool things. I personally, part of the Heartland mystery is the stamp of Judeo-Christian, and particularly Christian theology and spiritual experience and institutionalized religion on this land, which is not where these traditions originated, obviously. And the land where my people are from is not where those traditions originated, except for my Jewish ancestors, which is a small but mighty portion of my overall ancestry. And so, there's a big mystery for that. And for me, in terms of the ongoing damage that those traditions do and the ongoing gifts that they bring in this weird way. It's just part of the paradox, part of the mystery of everything, right? You know what I mean? The United States is another example of that for me, in terms of being this dream which was founded on these really beautiful principles, and also was this sort of, weird kleptocratic scam or shell game spun by the founding fathers to just make themselves rich. You know what I mean? They deposed monarchs and installed themselves and as the, installed basically commerce as the new monarch or whatever. So that, there's a lot of different paradoxical, tense sort of places that we have to sit in as contemporary people. It's like all of our traditions, whether you're Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, Jewish, even in some indigenous traditions, have shown themselves to be weaponizable in the, basically you can be a fascist about anything. So I'm just curious about that, because by the same token, ideologies or belief systems or religious traditions that we tend to want to throw away as progressive or leftist or radical, whatever kind of people, or spiritual, metaphysical leaning people, we tend to sometimes want to throw away those traditions wholesale. And then I think there's something that gets lost there too, not least of which is the reality that you can't just say, well, I'm just not a Christian anymore, I'm a theosophist. But if you leave the underlying Christian framework intact, you may then just, okay, so you're working with Thoth instead of Yahweh. Thoth can be a fucking dick too. You know what I mean? Oh, you're working with Gaia. Like many of y'all knew me or followed me during the period where I was really into Gaia. I have Gaia tattooed on my belly. And but I basically, because I had not fully discovered how to do the internal work that I needed to dismantle the way in which authority and violence and colonization and institutionalized religion had implanted itself in me culturally, in my body, in my behaviors, I was basically an evangelist for Gaia. I was basically bludgeoning people over the head with Gaian Wicca, It's just so we can all do that with anything, whether it's an ideology, a political framework, just an idea we have in a meeting. I do that all the time too. Not something I'm proud of. So what is my point? My point is that I'm really curious about religion, and that's what I want to teach about in my next Walking the Path. Those classes take longer for me to prepare for because I'm actually asking for a donation. And I want to really bring something fully robust, not just like conversational to them. So there's one of those now on the archive, and you can go look at that. And I just asked for a $20 donation. If you listen to it and you receive help from it, if you can't make that donation, you can give $5, you can give whatever, but that's just the asking. So I'm going to teach about that, but I just wanted to contextualize the crucifix. For me, it's actually very shamanic in the archetypal cross-cultural sense of there being an energy that we can call the shaman, that we could also call many other names. We just don't really have a good one. And anthropologists coined shaman, and so we kind of have run with it. And some of the people that originally used that term have said that they're not totally offended by it or actually appreciate its use. Some of them don't. It's complex. But in the sense of Jesus being a figure that as you relate to Jesus, he's not as one-dimensional as he can often seem. And there's a way in which direct spirit work that comes out of the shamanic tradition that I've studied, any figure, any true spirit or energy or deity for that matter, or archetype for that matter, can be related to and learned from. And so I'm curious about Jesus right now because he's just kind of up, because I live in this magical hamlet on this hill with all these churches and these monks and these nuns singing, and they're just really nice. And I mean, I'm sure they have complex feelings about me and my partner living here. I don't know, but who knows? I really have no idea. But I'm just really curious about that. And so that's the context in which, for me, I'm really interested in the vocabulary, the aesthetic, the inheritance of Judeo-Christian tradition, while I consider myself firmly not necessarily positioned, more like orbiting in a very different orbit. But I'm curious about what an earth-honoring Christianity would look like. I'm curious about what a planetary, to borrow from someone whose work I respect, Whitney Bowman's terminology, what a planetary Christianity would look like and what my role could be relative to that. Or if I have one, I don't know. So yeah, that's the context there. But let's move on. So I want to talk about the astrology. The Substack thing was really funny because 3 months ago or 2 months ago, I made a Substack thinking, okay, I'm going to shift. And then I didn't like the way the formatting was because it was just so different from MailChimp. And I was used to MailChimp giving me like a little bit of an Instagram grid capacity with the pictures that I like to share in my newsletter. And so I deleted it, which I could have just left it to the side, but I deleted it, which is so me. And so, of course, as Mars went retrograde in Gemini, which is my fifth house, here I find myself recreating, redoing all of that work. I also find myself with my manuscript circling back to the beginning to go back through again, another edit. You know what I mean? Because I'm just not quite there where I want to shop it to agents or whoever yet. I find myself in my community work. We are doing this big documentation project, going back to documents that we had brought forward in their rawer drafts over the course of the last 20 months or so. And here we go again, starting from the beginning, editing, which is writing. It's also creativity. It's part of the thing. It made me really think as I sat with the astrology in terms of what I could bring forward today, that the retrograde itself is sort of an archetype, right? Because all the planets go retrograde except for the sun and the moon, though they have their own kind of functions around that. But all the planets go retrograde. It's a perceptual thing. It's not an astronomical thing. It's an astrological thing. It's the perception of them going backwards in the sky, which I think is really key because it's so mysterious that that's how we mark this period. But the period is so viscerally felt and physical. So it's like, even if we mark it by something that seems to just be superficial, we are marking something true. And that's kind of divination, right? The cards, you lay them out. It seems pretty superficial and random and chaotic. If you live in like a dead nihilistic Nietzsche world, it's total chaos. You know what I mean? But it's not actually. There is some weird, mysterious order. There's a dance between order and chaos there. And, these astrological traditions, they're freaking old. Some people really spend a lot of time with the skies. And not only were they, I think, as rigorous or potentially more and rigorous and less biased than what we know of as science in the popular culture right now, but they were helped by spirit, is my experience of it, in the sense that like all of the really sort of rich spiritual inheritances, whether it's yoga, astrologies from different cultures, qigong, etc. Those aren't we didn't just figure those out. And often in the spiritual traditions from which they come, you'll find mythopoetic language or story about where they came from, like Shiva, bringing yoga in this form and da 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 da. So the retrogrades for me are all teachers about the cyclical quality of life, and that there will always be territory that we have to tread back over. And Mars retrograde particularly is a really key teacher for me about that, but also so is the energy of Gemini as the ruler of the third house. So to back up, if you don't know, right now Mars is in Gemini retrograde till somewhere around January. And if you want the exact dates, go somewhere else and just Google them. You don't need that right now from me. Or if you do need it, again, pause it, Google it. And Venus just entered Sagittarius. So she's actually going to oppose Mars retrograde, which really for me, and so will the sun coming up here between around November 20th and December 20th. And then the solstice happens. Wow. So we're kind of in the belly of this retrograde. And so what it's got me really experiencing is how repetitive human life is in the most beautiful sense. But it's not beautiful when you're acting out of your trauma. It's not beautiful when you actually can't engage with your human life, with the repetitive nature. Because, for example, like one of my Uber passengers yesterday, you're being driven after high school to work at Freddy's Steak Burger for probably and I'm projecting on this person. I don't know what their experience of that job is, but probably for not enough money for the time investment. And you're sleeping in this 12-minute Uber ride because you're so freaking tired. So there's this way in which I think because of much of the trauma of Western schooling, these extractive and exploitive and sort of authoritarian systems of schooling and culturing that flatten people to a routine that is basically of no benefit to them and is only of benefit to the power structure at large and this vertical hierarchy. We tend to, especially as like radicals, weirdos, Aquarians, culture workers, people that are more sensitive, we tend to then see routine as the enemy. Or we, like myself, if I veered from this extreme a lot, and I have Mars in Aries, so I have a lot of lessons from Mars. And I have a lot of other stuff in Aries too. So I veered from this completely rebellious, like no routine, blah, blah, like sort of positioning towards like very, very highly routine. And I still have, you know what I mean? I get up every morning. I do much of the same practices every single day for several years. That's how I live my life. And that's how I see humans. That's part of human health, is this holistic embrace of routine, but it's not a flattening. It becomes an addiction when it becomes something that we're repeating, looking for the same outcome, instead of recognizing that every single day my practice will be different. And it was really interesting because when I was super addicted and in addictive relationships with substances, particularly alcohol and also drugs and sex and other things, as chaotic as my life seemed, what I was getting from the alcohol was this illusion of sameness, of control, basically. Same with like when we have disordered eating and we start to like do things that it's like, it's clearly harmful. We know intellectually it's harmful. We have shame around it, emotional stuff, because I have issues with food too. But we're getting this sort of closed circuit, like rush and collapse, the high and the come down, and then we do it again and we do it again. So it becomes this routine, even though, on the outside, it seems like, oh, addiction is so chaotic. I'm at these parties and I'm staying up all night, but it's also so boring. Such diminishing returns to that kind of routine. So I really feel that going backwards to go forwards, that surrender to the cyclical nature of things as being a teacher of this next few months for us. What came up for me as I was sitting with Mars and Venus is Mars as not just the actor, the function. And if you don't have the context for this, you can look at where Mars sits in your chart. And your Mars in that sign tells you about the energy that your relationship to your internal Mars, which is sort of the connection between your personal Mars and the larger Mars, and Mars being sort of this, not truly an archetype, but not necessarily a deity. We're not talking about Greek or Roman gods here. We're talking about these planetary energies that come to us in this particular form as teachers in the context of the zodiac, in the context of the astrology. So Mars as not just the expression of how I do things, Mars in Aries, for example, explosive, really good at initiating action, harder, more challenging for me to finish, to bring the action to completion. Really good at doing things pretty quickly, harder for me to do them in a way that things don't get broken. Mars in Libra, kind of the opposite, sitting across the wheel. Mars in Libra, I need help. I need other people around me. I need to talk this through several times before I get to the point where I can actually take the action. I need a group to support me in taking the action. Let's do this together. Need to get out of my head and into the action kind of. But there's this sensitivity, this suaveness, this charisma that comes with Mars and Libra. So, place your Mars on the wheel and figure out what are the qualities that sparks for you. How do you experience that based on not just the system itself, but your own experience, right? How do you do? So Mars, not just the way we do things, but the motivator, that yang energy that says, I actually just got to go do something. That engine inside that is very personal, that drive that this morning when I woke up, I was like, yeah, I get it. Mars is retrograde. It's, in my fifth house in Gemini, conjunct my Chiron. There's like a lot to me that's saying, go hide in a ditch. Don't put yourself out there. But there's that quality that says, but I want to. I need to do. I need to speak. I need to communicate. I need to teach. I need to create. So Mars being sort of that engine of motivation, which is in that synergistic sort of yang-yin relationship to Venus as the attractor, the flower, the seducer, the flower to Mars's bee, the pollinator, maybe. And again, you might have a Mars and a Venus relationship that's totally inverted, and you're like someone very close to me actually has Mars in Libra, Venus in Aries. And it shows up in this very interesting way where it's like you have to rest and receive by doing, and you have to do by sort of like slipping within the cracks and rest and receiving help and, processing. It's really interesting. So I've been really feeling that whole question. And, just the irritations that come with a retrograde, that with an inner planet retrograde, like this morning, I woke up really motivated to do this video. I had a hair in my teeth, not like a splinter, not like a piece of food, a hair. And I was like poking at it, flossing, brushing, picking all through my Qigong practice, which one of the cues in the Qigong often is to put your tongue sort of behind the two front teeth a little bit. There's like a little chi point or something. I can't remember what they call that point. And I could not keep my tongue there. I could not keep it off of this hair. I was like, good Lord, am I going to record this video with this hair stuck in my teeth? And I'm thinking, gosh, if it's a hair that's like somehow jammed within my two teeth, is that ever going to leave? Is it going to rot there? You know what I mean? I was just like spiraling about it in very Mars retrograde Gemini fashion. And then I went and I took some tweezers and I pulled, and it wasn't even stuck in anything. It was just sitting there superficially after all of that brushing and flossing and picking from last night all the way through this morning. So I found that to be a very Mars retrograde Gemini feeling of just like, what the fuck? Then I lit something on fire on my altar by accident, a cloth. and I was like, oh my God, there must be these crazy messages from fire. My ancestors are mad at me, da, 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 da. And I didn't really get any clear message. It's just other than I actually kind of liked the way it looked, and it compelled me to fold that cloth in a different way that makes much more sense. So, just kind of being in the question of going back, surrendering to the slowness, surrendering to the weirdness of this time. Jupiter is retrograde in Pisces, squaring these two bodies of Venus and Mars. And there's something really interesting. I'm going to look at the ephemeris actually just to see when that ends. There's something really interesting to that because Jupiter is said to rule Pisces or being exalted in Pisces. I can't remember which. I'm not that kind of astrologer. So he's going to go direct soon on the 24th. And he's going to stay in Pisces until, wow, here we go, discovering this live with you or rediscovering it till the solstice on the 21st. He'll then move into Aries, which is like kind of the final, he's been wobbling back and forth a bunch. He's the final movement now of Jupiter kind of starting this new cycle. If you think of the zodiac as kind of a calendar, Aries is where it begins in most traditions. And so that's a shift, it's like a 10-ish year cycle. So there's something about that that's really up and about the next month, that we're really in the belly of this Mars Gemini with this tension between these two, the benefics of Venus and Jupiter, really holding Mars in the grace of doing something very not Martian, which is slowing down, returning to work over something again, stopping, accepting, just which I may be not fully listening to right now, right? Accepting the limitations of the season. And it's just interesting that falls right now in the Northern Hemisphere at solstice time, which is a time where we all struggle so much with the holidays and contemporary US culture, most of us, to slow down, to go into the deep yin, to rest, to turn the lights off, turn the music off, leave the party early, go to less things, eat less food. Not to, if you have disordered eating, just tune that out. But eat less food, stuff the body less, because we're actually less able to be active because it's freaking cold. It just suddenly, the winter slammed down on us. We went from 75 to like 25 here in the Midwest. And I'm not walking several miles a day like I normally do with my dog. I'm getting steps at the gym where I can, but it's not as much. I went from like 15,000 steps a day to like 5. So, of course, I need less calories. And then that sort of American colonial Mars and Aries, still with some stuff that I'm still transforming around that sort of pistoning sort of engine of progress is like, well, just eat more. Eat more so you don't have to feel that. Eat more so you don't have to soften into that hunger of winter. Eat more so you don't have to feel the grief of giving up those dreams that you weren't fully able to accomplish, that some of which need to just be mulched. Eat more so you don't feel the heartbreak. I keep thinking about the war. It's really interesting that this comes up for me now. I keep thinking about the war in Ukraine, which is one of several armed conflicts. One thing to celebrate, which we should definitely toast, is the ceasefire in Ethiopia, in the Tigray region. I just had deja vu about that. But and granted, there's a lot of complexity around that. It's not like a foolproof. We're at a ceasefire. Everything's good now. You know what I mean? I think close to 1 million or more people have been displaced by just that. But that's just to put us in context. I think in the media, if we're not reading the news a lot, if we're not reading particular sources a lot, we don't tend to see that the Ukraine thing is getting a lot of attention versus things that are happening in Africa, Asia, South America. There's in the global South to less white people, brown people, Black people. So, but I do keep thinking about the war in Ukraine, which is awful. And it's just one of those things. It's like the hair in the tooth, where it just sucks. It just sucks. And every day I read the headlines about it, and I just wish it weren't happening. I think about, for some reason, this brought me in my own personal weirdness to fighting with my partner, which in the grand scheme of things, we really don't fight that much at all. And I thought that relationships meant fighting, because that's, no offense, that's the household in which I was raised. And it's the culture in which we were all raised. You either the parents fought 24/7 or they didn't fight at all. You know what I mean? We all have this sort of backwardness or brokenness around Mars. And around conflict, around tension, around actually being able to be in our boundaries and come up against someone else's boundaries, and to have a disagreement and to realize that it's not necessarily conflict mediation for one person or the other person to get their way. That's not actually always how compromise looks or should look. So I grew up, and I went through many, many relationships that were at times not healthy at all. Where conflict was just explosive, with vitriol, with, very extreme, very polarizing, very Western United States culture, whatever. And so it's been sort of in a similar way of recognizing that a lot of human life is kind of boring. I eat the same food. I wake up in the same bed with the same partner. I mean, there's this teaching of retrograde that's not actually boring. if you choose to be present with it, my partner's breath smells different every morning, and so does mine. You know what I mean? We have a different frequency. We share our dreams, and our dreams have been different every morning. That's one thing we do almost every morning. And that's just in that relationship. My breakfast doesn't taste the same every morning, even though it literally is the same food that I cook every single morning. My practice doesn't feel the same. So there's that. But of course, it's kind of boring relative to maybe how 21-year-old Alexis would have seen or experienced things. It's there's not as much superficial novelty. So there's this stability inside of the relationship that is one of the places that some of my issues from the past that are still I'm still in process with, claw at a little bit of like, why aren't we fighting? Why isn't anything wrong? We're just going to work and working in our spare time on things we care about and cuddling on the couch and watching the one show that we like, RuPaul's Drag Race UK. It's not stagnant. We're not in a rut. It's also not huge, crazy, blah, change. We already went through that. We moved house several times this year. It's just stability. And so there's something there about that. So it brings me back to the war and many things, to be honest, because there's a war on workers. There's a war on, as much as we may not be displaced by an active military campaign in this country, but people are being displaced by active military campaigns being undertaken by the US military with our tax dollars. And what's worse for me, with our energy, with our spirit, with the spirit of what this country is, an abuse of that spirit. And that displacement is rippling all around us. People are already wildly displaced by both the economic situation, the growing exploitation of gig workers. You have a whole class of people that move seasonally amongst sort of like big warehouse work to agricultural work, living in RVs and stuff all across the Southwest and the South of the US. Which has been, widely researched by actual journalists, and you can go and research some of that. You have people that are in this sort of near constant state of displacement from places like Houston or Florida, where there's this constant kind of onslaught of extreme weather. There's just this constant movement. And you have the poor who are constantly being evicted. The KC Tenants is a really great organization that is here local, that is foregrounding this, that there's this sort of shell game that the land owning and landlording class undertakes. And the tenants are basically a resource that are just kind of shuffled around, or like grain shipments, basically. And every time they experience a costly eviction, who makes money from that? So there's wars going on many fronts, is what I'm trying to say. And so as I'm sitting in the heartbreak of that, I come back to some of the worst fights that my partner and I have had. And I just think about how hard it is sometimes to stop that runaway train when you're saying things you really don't mean. And you're hearing things in a way that they were not intended. And you want more than anything but to just be having one of the good days. And for us, it's hard because there's a lot of good days. It's mostly good days. So when the bad days come up, it's like, fuck. I just think about that relative to the war. And I don't know exactly what's trying to come through right now, other than that, I sit in my everyday, and I read my news, and I work through my process, and I deal with the conflicts that come up with me internally, and the grief and the emotions that come up for me relative to current events in the world. And I always try to land it in my own life, not to hyper-personalize everything in a narcissistic way, not to go into a new age trope where if I could just transform conflict in myself, there would be no conflict in the world. It's both. We have to advocate for peace in the world, But we can't do that without changing it within ourselves. And we can't change it in ourselves, I think, without doing the work in the world. It's both. And I just think of this, I just think about so many things that are happening that are just these runaway trains of one person's poor decisions or millions of people's poor decisions. And Mars really has me in the question of that. I don't have an answer around that. I just keep praying for it to stop. And then I noticed, you know what I mean? I noticed the ways that I want to dehumanize people like Putin. It's easy for me to empathize with the soldiers. You know, there's these reports coming out of just awful things done by these soldiers. But basically, it just feels like a bunch of teenagers run amok, which is basically like Western culture, last 5,000 years, a bunch of teenage boys emotionally run amok, given worse and worse, more and more powerful weapons and technologies for doing so, with somehow less and less emotional maturity. Maybe they're not even teenagers. It's like children with the emotional children, sexual urges of teenagers, bad combination, bodies of men. It's easier for me to empathize with soldiers as victims. It's harder for me to empathize with the people in power. And I think that's because I am a person of power, in power myself, with a certain positioning. Not just as a male presenting, male passing person in most contexts, not all. Not just as a white person, as a citizen of the United States, but as a teacher, as someone that, you know, I don't have a lot of institutional power necessarily, or at least it doesn't feel that way. But I have this power. We were talking about this a lot in one of the classes that just ended. I have this power of sometimes knowing things or having access to knowledge that other people don't have. And that's really powerful in a culture of such widespread ignorance. And so I'm really trying to import that heartbreak and personalize it, not because I think I'm just going to like solve the war in Ukraine or anything necessarily by doing my personal work, but because I don't want to be feeding that beast in any way. And I want to keep moving forward in a way that I'm feeding those kinds of energies less. And I just think of how sometimes when I'm in the fight, it's so easy to just go on autopilot. And it's unresolved ancestral things at times. It's unresolved personal things at times. It's unresolved cultural things. It's fear. It's addiction. It's fear of being vulnerable to say, I didn't mean to say it that way. Fear of being vulnerable. That's like, I know you didn't mean it that way, but it still hurt. That pushes me onto the runaway train, onto autopilot. And I guess that leads me to why I keep wanting to share the work that I'm sharing, because it gives me tools to come off of that train, to pull the brakes and to say, well, God damn it. This just feels shitty. And I'm sorry. And I want to stop contributing to that. And I want to advocate for my boundaries. And I want to sit in the conflict, the tension, just let that spark creativity so that we can go forward in a new way. Also brings me to the eclipses, which maybe I don't need to go into any more like technical astrology, but that first eclipse that just happened last month in Scorpio was really rough. Because we just were sitting in the shit. And it was sort of impossible not to keep taking it out on each other, me and my partner. But by the second one, we had somehow gotten to a place where we could sit in the shit together and not cannibalize each other around it. And there were a lot of really tender and challenging conversations that were necessary for us to get to that place within that period of weeks, a couple of weeks. So if we shift technically, just to touch briefly then on the other major transit system happening, you've got the lunar nodes, which are the deep dragon, the deep longing of the moon for growth on a soul level that is in this really interesting tension that is being illuminated by the fact that the lunar nodes are currently in Taurus and Scorpio. North node, the head of the dragon, feasting in Taurus land. South node, the tail of the dragon, the butthole of the dragon, as I like to affectionately call it, exhuming, catharting in Scorpio land. You have them squaring Saturn in Aquarius, and they're going to change around a similar time frame. So they are, I'll just look because I do have this written down. The North and South nodes will move on July 17th of 2023. The North node will move into Aries. The South node will move into Libra, kind of like the Mars-Venus duality that we have been talking about, that I was talking about. Saturn will finally finish out his tour of Aquarius on March 7th. Yay! All the Aquariuses celebrate. So there's this connection there of these movements happening similarly. They're in a square, so there's this tension that's pregnant within that. Eric last week, who does a lot of finance reading and research, was like, what's happening astrologically that crypto is going to collapse? Because I think it is this week. And I was like, oh, it's the eclipse on Uranus in Taurus squaring Saturn. And he was like, oh, yeah. What happened? That FTX company 3, 4, 5 days later folded. This guy lost $26 billion. Yeah, that's going to be great for the economy, I'm sure. Thank you, crypto creeps. So Saturn sits in a natural tension with the moon. The moon has a lot to do with our personal needs, and it's really easy to get those, to overprivilege those. And many of us do because we aren't really given very sound emotional skills, energetic skills, life skills to just meet our needs. It also sits in tension then with the lunar nodes, because the lunar node is about the deepest need, which is the soul level growth, or one deep need. Maybe it's not a hierarchy, but it's one deep need that is a polarity or an axis that's available for us through the astrology. It comes to us from Vedic astrology, as far as I know. And then Saturn sits over here on the outer ring of things, saying, I don't really give a shit who you are. I don't really give a shit what your purpose is. You do need to manifest your purpose. It is personal to you, and it is also generational, because everyone born within a certain 2 or 3 years of each other, we're all part of a Saturn generation. But all Saturn really seems to be caring about in my work with Saturn is that we do our purpose in a way that makes it, well, doesn't make it harder for other people to do their purpose. So it's the health of the system. It's the legacy. It's the 7 generations, to borrow from sort of this generalized indigenous teaching. It's the doing it so that my next generation has a better time doing it, leaving things better than we found it, to quote Maren Morris, one of my current favorite contemporary country crazy people, who the right wing is obsessed with, because she's not a transphobe, because she speaks out towards the self-determination of trans people. Thank you very much. So Saturn is sitting there sort of constantly calling us into relationship with the environment as a system that has limitations. Naturally, you can only do so much in a day. You can only put so much in a bank account. You can only, extract so many resources from a system, right? Saturn is a teacher we're really out of relationship with. And I think contemporary literature around, or pop astrology around the Saturn return, should show us that. Saturn is the adult. Saturn is the father, the teacher, the farmer, the reaper, the killer when necessary, the destroyer when necessary, but also the builder, the patient artisan who's just laying that next brick, who's just making that next inscription, who's just copying that next line in the manuscript, right? Who's just doing that same fucking medical Qigong form that helps, even though it's fucking boring and I want to do other Qigong forms, but I go back to the one, you know? So Saturn has a lot to teach us about patience and presence and maturity. And that sort of, and so we're trining, because all the air signs trine one another, all the same elements trine one another. Saturn is trining Mars right now in retrograde. So there's this collaboration that they're having right now, which is a very interesting Mars and Saturn positioning to have. In both of them, sort of Saturn basically being like, hold up. We're not going to go do all those things. We're going to go back here and check our work and make sure that it was good. We're going to keep working on that same fucking manuscript, even though you actually want to be writing the next book and the next book, and you're already on to like 5 books from there, and you're already writing the epigraph on your tombstone. Come back here to this moment. And Saturn is squaring in this collaboration the North Node, South Node in Taurus and Scorpio, and Uranus in Taurus, who's spending a longer tour in Taurus. Where did he go in there? Like 2017, 2018, somewhere around that? He's going to be in there for a while. They. This is Uranus. So what was coming up for me as I was sitting with all of this today, another thing, you know, one is that patience, that sense of time. Time as not being the enemy, but actually being the function by which energy becomes matter. And I don't truly understand that, but it's just like this sort of truism that floats around for me of time, space, being different experiences of the same thing, of existence. And Saturn being the one, particularly as this next month then spits us out into Capricorn, which is where Saturn starts to rule the season. Which is meant to be the deep yin time, which is so interesting because Capricorn is the big manifester, right? And this is the time in the Northern Hemisphere where we're meant to do nothing, where we're meant to rest. So it basically is, did you spend the rest of the year making a legacy that you can now eat off of? Or did you spend the rest of the year blowing all of your resources and now you're fucking exhausted and starving? And so you actually have to go out to all these parties and get drunk so that you can fill yourself with that false adrenal stress crisis energy. You have to go fight with your family a bunch at Christmas so that you can fill yourself with the stress adrenal crisis energy. You have to keep looking at the blue light super late at night so that you can fill yourself with the stress adrenal crisis energy, instead of resting on the foundation of what you've built. So astrology is so interesting. So that's happening, but Saturn squaring Uranus, who is the innovator. And what I was coming to today around Uranus, to kind of wrap all of this up, we think of Uranus as the rebel. Uranus is a planet that was discovered in like 1783 or something around that time, ushering in sort of the beginning stages of what we consider the age of Aquarius, ushering in some ways like the Enlightenment, that kind of stuff, the Industrial Revolution. Uranus is the innovator and the rebel, but Uranus was the father who Saturn castrated to actually bring us into this next age. If we listen to like Plato or Ovid or Ovid? Yeah, Ovid, of existence, which has time and space. So Uranus existed as this great atmospheric cosmic embrace of Gaia in this time before time, where their children were these, what the Greeks considered monsters. But if you actually really sit with maybe some of these monsters that were imprisoned in Tartarus and the earth, they're probably just nature spirits, they're probably just more like land spirits that the Greeks were wrestling with, because the Greeks were sort of like really trying to tame their environment to a big degree and through their myths. And Saturn comes in and castrates Uranus which is an interesting thing to do to your father, and brings us into this time of time and space. And then, of course, Zeus or Jupiter comes in and castrates Saturn, all of that. But so it's really interesting because we consider Uranus to be the rebel, right? The Prometheus is another sort of archetype, the fire, the one that stole fire from the gods and gave it to the people, that is very Uranian or Aquarian. But Uranus was actually the original emperor who ruled everything, and whose rule was in some way despotic because there was no time and space, so nothing could change. And so I think there's a really interesting mystery to this. And so I think of Uranus, I think about this Bertrand Piccard quote that I shared in my last newsletter that I got from the New Yorker, where he said something along the lines of, we don't innovate by doing something new, we innovate by releasing old beliefs or old ways of thinking. I think of Uranus as actually being so old, this old way. And as a resource, as a relationship, Uranus is the bigness of the sky, the above, the cosmic weather, the true yang, versus Gaia, the earth, the house system, however you want to locate the earth in the chart, the rising sign as being the below. And so I think of Uranus as actually sort of sitting there being like, this was an old way of thinking, that you could subtract. Cryptocurrency was supposed to be this new, big, crazy thing, so innovative, cool, new technology, wow, blockchain. And it's actually more of the same crap, because it actually, to kind of stomp on Marx or Silver Federici, further subtracts money from labor. One more step or several more steps exponentially, which is why this tech revolution that we're living through and being experimented on by is so unsustainable, because it can do things so exponentially. It's like the opposite of the gold standard, even though the proponents of cryptocurrency are like, it's the gold standard, it's the new gold standard. No, it doesn't exist. It's just burning carbon to put a number in a fucking spreadsheet or whatever somewhere. So of course, Uranus heralded the onset of this, and also big aspects to Uranus are fucking destroying cryptocurrency, revealing it for what it is, which is that it's a myth, it's a fallacy, it's as fallacious as all currency. Which, if we don't have a true relationship, I'm not saying we got to burn all the money. I don't know what world we would live in without money at this point. I think that can only be bad for poor people. If we don't think about that too hard, well enough. But that it seems to be that Uranus is bringing us actually back to what is true relative to Uranus being in Taurus, which is not a place where Uranus is sort of like necessarily native. We don't have like the traditional rulerships with Uranus. But actually, maybe Uranus and Taurus makes a lot of sense, because Gaia was his lover. And in some myths, maybe even his mom. And that's, there's a whole kind of mystery there. But we don't need to go into. But there's something really key and mysterious there about Uranus being the one that, through that sort of, you could think, imperial perspective, where you can stand on the throne and look down and look out from the bowl of the sky and see everything, and everything is just kind of a pawn to be played with. You actually recognize that you actually have to come back down to earth to really make change there. You have to be incarnate, which kind of puts us in that Promethean place where we're chained to the mountain, getting our liver eaten out by vultures, because we did the right thing, because we took a risk, because we gave our gift. We noticed a surplus and we took it somewhere else. So it's a lot more mysterious teaching. I thought I wanted to wrap this up more logically, but I don't need to. It's just what I wrote down is, this is human life. And that the releasing of the old, we rediscover the old. And that releasing of the old, we discover the new, which is now. the ways which actually are sound. And pass the test not just of Uranus, but of Saturn. So what's up next year? Just briefly, I'll talk about it later. The nodes are going to move into a cardinal sign, and that's going to square Pluto in Pluto's last like little chunk of time in Capricorn to kind of put a finer point on everything we've been talking about already. Pluto's going to leave Capricorn finally 2024, November of 2024. So we have 2 more solid years. And that does actually accord pretty cleanly with the lunar nodes in Capricorn, in Aries and Libra. So I'm going to have to live with COVID. That's definitely one thing that probably wants to come through around that. We're going to have to learn to live with a lot of things that have come out of this period. And it's probably going to be pretty crunchy. We're going to have to keep learning how to live with grief and heartbreak, and actually how to do that in a way that feeds both the north node of the growth of our soul, the south node of the catharsis of what is old for us in our personal past and in our karmic past, in our past lives and our collective past, and also satisfies Saturn, and that we're doing our personal growth and processing and the activism and the warriorship and the heartbreaking courage and true fucking risks that will be necessary for us to leave this planet truly better than the one that was given us by our fucking parents. We're going to have to work with fear. So that's the next couple of years. But in the meantime, I want to work with folks that want to take this kind of direct experiencing with spirit into their lives and don't know how to do it because they're maybe already trying to do it and it's getting pulled sideways by trauma stuff. I want to work with folks that are just getting pulled sideways by trauma stuff or illness or lack of resourcing, interpersonal issues, personal issues, addictions, etc., and want to figure out how to dismantle those things from the inside out. I was thinking about the movie Spirited Away in terms of, on the one hand, these energetic practices that I've been training to teach over the last several years and all the other stuff that I bring to bear in my business of star service, when actually doing it as a service for people, with people, it can be very secular, and that vexes me because I'm just so not. I actually think it's this new understanding of secularity that I am, but I'm not like atheist at all, obviously. Just like, yeah. I'm not necessarily a theist. I'm just working with spirits. And it can be very secular to work with energy. It doesn't have to have any sort of these beliefs. There's not really a belief system. It's more like this larger set of like universal principles that seem to check out as hypotheses with science and spirituality. And so we kind of use these as our biggest, the largest field of the cosmology, or kind of not bound, but just sort of like over there is all things are one. Over there is everything is energy. Over there is everything affects everything. Over there is we have free will. They're big, they're huge. You can wrestle with them, but they're not like hyper personal. They're not stuck in one system or anything like that. So that's kind of where these energy practices sit in. So they can be very atheist because they're really just about you and your somatic or embodied experience and learning how to do that. On the other hand, they feed really well into spirit work because I know a lot of spirit workers, diviners, etc., people that are just empathic or spiritual and don't really necessarily want to be, and it's kind of struggling with that really can have benefited from the energy practices because they're about restoring clarity and center and resourcing and a very sort of like integrous, almost scientific method for sensing truth to where you're not just having to rely on intuition You're also not just having to rely on logic. It's a practical, embodied way of combining them. So those are really helpful for spirit workers too. And they're really helpful for folks that are kind of in the middle, that are really curious about how, I don't know why, but I feel called towards this kind of work. And I want a right relationship with spirit, maybe. I want to see what that would look like for me, what that would feel like for me. I love helping people connect with their personal helping spirits, helping people learn how to work with them, helping people how to work with the spirit world in general, artists, queer and trans people, parents, children. There's so many ways in which all people are challenged by the need to just reconcile with the visible and invisible worlds in a good way, in a way that releases the old so that we can reclaim the older, the ancient, the true ways, releases the old so that we can actually let the earth just like show us what is true, in terms of our behaviors, in terms of how we do art, how we do activism, etc. So that's kind of what I want to work on with folks. And I really hope to work on with more folks. So if the prices on the website are like causing you to bulk, just like reach out, because right now I'm driving for Uber to support myself. And so I have the flexibility to do a little sliding scale work because I have surrendered to the wage economy, which is something I wanted to talk about more today because it's so much in a part of my experience right now. Such a teacher, such a Saturn lesson. Thank you, sir. But yeah, I have a trust in this system that I've invested so much in and that I'm so well supported by, that no matter who you are, if resources is the one reason, we can figure that out. For most of us, that's not usually the reason. You know what I mean? Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is that cut and dried. So I was thinking about the movie Spirited Away and how it's in a lot of ways it is so. There's my experience as a fledgling spirit worker was like being the kid who, like, my parents get waylaid by their own stuff, and basically it's the fear that drives greed that sticks the parents in the pig pen. Not to be fat phobic or anything around it. But there's nothing wrong with pigs. I love pigs. They're such cool animals. But such interesting companions that we have had for many hundreds, thousands of years. But so the child is kind of lost in this freakish, if you haven't seen the movie, I love it. It's like my favorite cartoon. Sort of place where the spirits come to bathe. And it's really, it's like not all spirits are good. Some of them are violent. There are hungry spirits that can't stop eating that become these giant monsters. There are, witches that want to curse and bind certain spirits into certain forms and enslave them. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that happens. The spirit world is like nature. There's predators, there's prey, there's everything in between, but it's still all part of this synergistic oneness, and there's ways to work with it. So where you don't have to be the lost kid that's stranded because your culture is so deficient, because your culture has left behind all the practices that by which people worked with spirits, not in grandstanding, necessarily institutionalized ways, but in ways that were rhythmic, that made sense, that were seasonal, that were practical, that were collectively sound, that were individually sound, that actually made you more sane. But not sanity in the contemporary sense of sociopathy, where I'm stepping over people that are starving on the street, where I'm looking away from the people that are suffering and maybe even looking down on them. Not that kind of sanity, where I'm saying, well, only these things that this body of academics can measure and approve of is real. That to me is the insanity. The sanity is there's some fucking invisible weird ass spirit shit going on. And there are ways to learn how to work with it. So that's what I want to help people with. And I hope to continue seeding this work out in the world in a way that brings all those that can benefit into my circle and brings me continually into the circles of people that I can benefit from, and builds community underneath it all. So thank you for being here and listening and participating. I'm sorry we didn't do Well, let's just close with a practice, a quickie. So 5 minutes or less. So I just invite you to take a moment to begin to withdraw your energy back, that thread of your intention that was just you listening to this call, even if you didn't necessarily thread consciously your intention in, welcome it back. And I give great gratitude to all the beings and energies that resourced us in this work, spirits below and above and in each direction. Spirits of the land and great spirits of these lands, helping spirits and ancestral helping spirits, earth and air and fire and water. Thank you all so much. Go if you must, stay if you can. We release you with all of our love and all of our gratitude. We dissolve this circle when we step out. And then just take a moment as you step out to trust into that place where you have anchored yourself by your intention, by the willingness to show up in the practice where we began. Anchored yourself in the earth and in the heavens, called in that pillar of your sovereignty and your truth. Invoked the spark of wanting by which you chose to incarnate, by which you chose to leave the oneness and become a body on planet Earth at this time. And as you feel into that spark, which is probably in your belly, notice what it needs from you in this moment to feed it. What is the next step, resourced by the knowing of the earth rising up, the knowing of all of the humans that have ever lived, the knowing of the terrestrial Gaian sort of organism of the whole planet, the true yin that is just form, matter, space and time. Let that resource your knowing of what is your next step. And let that Uranian, cosmic, vast, inspired, divinely ordained perspective that is actually still totally rooted in the oneness, in the cosmos, in the time before time, in this place before place, that place that knowledge can't eat. Let that also inspire your spark in your belly of what's your next step. Where do you go from here? What do you need to surrender to a little more in this season? And what, in spite of all the challenges, do you need to pick up in this next month? What practice, what process can you engage? What practice can you undertake daily? What ritual will help you get through a gap? What person or practitioner or friend or loved one or spirit is there for you to help you take that next step? No matter what that step looks like. And you may pause the recording and sit longer in that inquiry. You may sit in that inquiry with the earth and the sky resourcing you as a practice. And again, if you have any shares about what comes up for you, please share them via the comments on Substack, on YouTube, on Instagram, via email. And thank you so much for being here. I honor your spark. When you feel ready, come out, pat yourself down, move into the rest of your day. Have a beautiful day. Thank you.